Hi, this is Mary Kopczynski, the CEO of RegAlytics, with your update on this week's 29,392 regulatory alerts. But before I get started, I'm going to let you know that I got roped into a podcast called Jammin' and Plannin'. I'll let you know when it comes out, but basically it's a podcast with my friends John Morgan and Scott Stathis where people talk about what they do on Wall Street, but they also talk about musical instruments that they play. And despite my total stage fright about it, I am definitely talking about my experience of being a longtime piano player. So as soon as it's out, I'll put it in the link in the comments for you to watch Jammin' and Plannin' and see me do my stupid human tricks on the piano, including playing Heart and Soul upside down. Uh, Back to our regularly scheduled programming. I'm continuing on with episode 4 of the One Big Beautiful Act breakdown. Again, I'm reading the entire thing top to bottom and identifying what I personally think is interesting. And again, I do have a law degree, but I retired, so don't take this as legal or tax advice. It's just me seeing what I'm seeing. The topic of the week is student loans. So, yes, there has been some media buzz about the impact of the One Big Beautiful Bill on student loans. Some folks are extremely worried that it is going to skew university admissions towards the haves and away from the have-nots. Some folks are worried that bright students may just not be able to go to much needed science, math, and particularly medical fields because they can't afford the tuition. But to really understand what the One Big Beautiful Bill does, you kind of need to know how student loans worked in the past. So to make it simple, as I often do, let's just say there was a before and an after. Before refers to pre-2010, the Healthcare and Education Reconciliation Act. So pre-2010, there were two paths to going to college. One, there was the Federal Family Education Loan, the FFEL. It was a program where private banks and state agencies made the actual loans, and then the federal government, via the U.S. Department of Education, guaranteed repayment and subsidized interest for eligible borrowers. This lasted from 1965 to 2010. In between there, in 1993, people realized that the government was on the hook for losses anyway, so why not also get the upside? So that is why the direct loan program was created, where in addition to the FFEL program, the U.S. Department of Education was actually loaning Treasury funds directly to borrowers. So then when we get to 2010, which is only a few years after the big 2008 financial crisis, the banks were now the bad guys. And remember, the government had rescued the banks with TARP loans, which was the Trouble Asset Relief Program, and the government actually made money from TARP. How much money was made is subject to interpretation, okay? But anyway, with this idea in mind, the Healthcare and Education Reconciliation Act of 2010 ended any new FFEL loans, those were the private ones, and from July 1st, 2010 onward, all new federal student loans have been made directly by the Department of Education under the direct loan program. And the loan servicing, which was the billing, the customer service, that's all handled by contracted companies like Moela, Nelnet, etc. But the lender of record is actually the U.S. Department of Education. And the amount you could borrow changed on if you were a student or a parent. Students could borrow about $20K and then a year, and then separately they could get a different loan from the government that was up to whatever the school charged. And then parents, however, could borrow the full cost of attendance minus whatever aid they received. And this is presumably because parents are more financially established and more likely to pay back a loan. So what does the One Big Beautiful Bill do? Starting in July of 2026, graduate and professional students have hard caps. They can only borrow $20,500 a year for most graduate programs, $50,000 for professional programs like medicine and law, but a lifetime limit of $100,000 and $200,000 depending upon the degree type. Parent loans are also capped, 20 grand per year and 65,000 total for each dependent student. And there's also a universal lifetime loan cap of 257,500 for federal borrowing. So why does this matter? Well, the average cost of a 4-year medical degree is over 250,000 in tuition alone, and for dental, vet school, or law school, it can be similar or even higher when you add living expenses. And so these new federal caps will not cover the full bill at many schools, and that means students and parents will have to go to private lenders to make up the difference with higher interest rates, stricter underwriting, and fewer repayment protections. Now, some critics say this change will make advanced degrees less accessible, putting the American dream further out of reach for anyone without family wealth, whereas supporters are arguing it could rein in tuition inflation by removing this sort of blank check effect of unlimited federal spending. Either way, this is a pretty big shift in how graduate and parent borrowers are going to finance higher education, and it certainly could reshape the economics of professional school in the United States. And that's it this week for RegAlytics. We have the global supply chain of all the world's regulatory alerts in one very easy to use place. If you need anything related to regulation, give us a call.